Hello. Hello and welcome to MoonCon 25, The Pantheons, produced by Moon Books Publishing and presented by me, Rachel Patterson. Today we have four wonderful speakers for you, each one covering a different pantheon. We start with the Greeks, then the Irish, followed by the Minoans, and then the Romans invade because that's their thing. We finish up with a panel Q&A with all of the speakers. If you have any questions during the talks, please do pop them in the comments and I will put them forward to the speakers when we do the panel. So I would like to welcome to the screen best-selling author, witch, teacher, and all manner of other things, Irisanya Moon. Welcome.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome to everybody who is here right now or watching it later. I have the privilege of starting with the Greeks, but before we do that, I wanted to start off with defining pantheon because we're going to be doing that all day. So,
Four talks and we don't know what they're about.
so by the way, this is what a pantheon is, if you're not real sure. So, pantheon is a word derived from Greek, and pan for all, and the theon for gods, so all the gods, or a temple of all the gods, or common to all the gods. And it is basically, the group of beliefs, gods, other beings, myths that take up and encompass one group's mythology. Sometimes I use those interchangeably. But there's a person called Christopher Free that actually talks about this really well, or Fee, excuse me, from Gods, Heroes, and Kings. A pantheon is an overview of a given culture's gods and goddesses and reflects not only society's values, but also its sense of itself. A pantheon directed by a thunderbolt-wielding autocrat might suggest a patriarchy and the valuing of warrior skills. A pantheon headed by a great mother goddess could suggest a village-based agricultural society. Now, those are big, generalizations. Generalizations. But let's get to the Greeks.
I will leave you to it. Have
Thank you
fun
so
and
much.
enjoy it, everyone.
Absolutely. So, the Greeks. I'm actually going to also start with this really great quote about myth from Richard Buxton, who, if you haven't heard of him and you're really interested in the Greeks, his writing is definitely something to check out. So it goes, one widespread usage of the word myth is exemplified by a sentence such as this. It's a myth that all English people drink tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A myth, in this definition, is just a widely held misconception. However, this is a simplistic definition, which defines a myth in terms of its falsity. It does nothing to alert us of the imaginative richness and social significance of stories and storytelling. A different and more useful kind of definition, the kind with which we shall be operating here, goes like this. A myth is a socially powerful traditional story. So let's keep that in mind when we think about myth. Now, when I talk about the Greeks, or when hopefully anybody talks about the Greeks, we talk a lot about ancient Greece. And as though it's this monolith and everybody thinks the same things and everybody practiced in the same way, not true. Greece is not, ancient Greece and Greece today is not a monolith. It is definitely an assembly of different practices, beliefs, structures, and various ways to tell stories. I like to talk about Greek mythology as being fan fiction because a lot of it is told through a lens, told through another lens, told through someone who wanted the story to mean this, etc., etc. Each home in ancient Greece had its own practices, had its own deities, definitely had things within the context of society, but more often than not, they also had things that they did at home. And some of those we don't know. So the bigger stories are the ones that made it through. Also the ones, as I talked about in the other quotes, are the ones that were most socially relevant and often instructive of society and the ways in which to interact. The gods were everywhere in ancient Greece, celebrated in festivals and temples and sanctuaries in the everyday. They were also, there were sacrifices and offerings and rituals, and The fact of the matter is, in ancient Greece, the gods weren't really separate from things, even though they were up high on Olympus, or at least the Olympians were. We'll get to that. Temples to various Greek gods are far beyond Greece to this day. They're also found in Italy and Sicily and what is Turkey now. So that's something to remember. One of the best parts of Pantheons is learning the creation story. And to be clear, there are several in ancient Greek mythology, but the one that I really like comes from Theogony, or Hesiod's Theogony, an epic poem that really has structured ancient Greece and has structured our ideas of it today. There are a lot of translations of this. So if you come across Theogony, maybe you try to find a couple different translations. The one that I'm going to use in a moment is from M.L. West, and it's the one I tend to refer to a lot. But let's set the scene for the Pantheon of Greeks, ancient Greece, but also today. First came the chasm, and then broad-breasted earth, secure seat forever of all the immortals who occupy the peak of snowy Olympus. The misty Tartara and a remote recess of the broad-pathed earth, and Eros, the most handsome among the immortal gods. Dissolver of flesh who overcomes the reason and purpose in the breasts of all gods and all men. Out of the chasm came Erebus and the dark night, and from night in turn came bright air and day, whom she bare in shared intimacy with Erebus. Earth bore first of all one equal to herself, starry heaven, so that he could cover her all about, to be a secure seat forever the blessed gods. And she borne the long mountains, pleasant haunts of the goddesses, the nymphs who dwell in the mountain glens. And she bore also the undraining sea and its furious swell, not in union of love, but then, bedded with heaven, she bore deep swirling Oceanus. The story of how everything began, out of chaos, out of a chasm, a void, out of the possibility that there was something coming next. Often in Greek mythology, there's a lot of focus and many, many movies and books on the Olympians, but they're not the only gods. There were some before them. So I want to talk about them just a little bit. The truth of the matter is, this is just an overview. The Greek mythology is very expansive, but the good news also is that I wrote a book about it that comes out the end of November. So let's talk about deities though real quick, because those are the ones that are usually the shiny parts of the pantheon. So I said Olympians are not the first. So the first ones are the ones that I just spoke about in the story. And those are the primordial gods. Those are the gods at the beginning of everything. They're darkness and light and eros and time and the water. Those forces, those pieces that make up society and that end up making up the world. Some of the primordial gods are chaos, Kronos, time, Nyx, night, Eros, love, not to be confused with Aphrodite's son Eros, Gaia, earth, Tartarus, that deep beneath, sort of what we might call not the underworld, but sort of a place of punishment. It's really deep in the framework of the world, below the underworld, but also a god. Uranus, that sky, or Uranus, and many, many more. But these primordial gods existed to create the world and to create the foundation for this pantheon. But of course, the gods got together and had more gods, as is the way this goes in Greek mythology and mythologies overall. Gaia gave birth to a lot of different gods, and those are called the Titans. The Titans are, again, second generation gods, and they are some of the ones we begin to recognize in other stories. So that is everyone from Cronus, not Kronos, Cronus, Phoebe, Oceanus, the ocean, Rhea, and also Thea, Themis, and according to some stories, Hecate. Now, there are others too, and they all have different parts to play in ancient Greece. And one of the things that happens with when you get a lot of gods together is that they have more gods. And that is where we get the Olympians. The Olympians came from the Titans, mostly. And we recognize the Olympians if you have any background in seeing the myths at all. The Olympians being Aphrodite, Apollo, Ares, Artemis, Athena, Demeter, Dionysus, Hephaestus, Hera, Hermes, Hestia, Poseidon, and of course, Zeus. So all of these gods have something to offer to the mythology and to the pantheon. All of these gods offer not only qualities that people might look up to, but they also offer stories that we might derive lessons from, often warnings. But these gods were meant to give a face or a personification to different parts of society. So we think about Ares, war, Zeus, leadership, power, Aphrodite, love, um, Hestia, hearth and community, etc. And they are definitely beings of importance, but it depends on who you talk to about whether or not they were, how do I say this, interested in humans. Sometimes they really were, and sometimes they really are not. I think it's Plato that said something about a distrust of sort of the idea of deities, because sometimes it's said that you could, as long as you did the right offerings and the right rituals, you could be wicked and get away with it. Um, it's a nice little out, and that makes sense from these gods. But also in a pantheon are not only the creation stories and the deities and things like that, and also beings, but there's also different parts of religion and ritual, different things that folks in ancient Greece used to do, and to this day, some of us still do. One of the things that, there's a book that the name escapes me, but it's by Lawrence Hatab. And he says that if we recall the existential meaning of the sacred in a mythical world, we can well understand such a form of intimacy. But the preoccupation of beauty and joy, visual and sensual delight, is perhaps nowhere so pronounced as in Greek religion. So, as part of my book on the Greek pantheon, I talk about a whole bunch of things that were part of the religion and ritual, and at least the things that we can know from source materials and source texts. And I also go through what source texts are really helpful. At least they have been for me. So, some of the religion and ritual aspects that we could go into for many, many hours, but we don't have that today. Talking about offerings. So, offerings to the gods, very big deal. Gods like to be appreciated, some of them more than others, but they like to have things given to them, prayers said to them. There could also be sacrifices. Sacrifice and animal sacrifice was really big in ancient Greece, not for every god, but for a lot of them. So that was something that you would do often in celebration or worship, or sometimes when you're asking for something, and also at various festivals. There's also a lot of focus on making oaths, so oath making and promising things to gods. One of the things that I do in rituals with Greek deities is to make sure that, we do take some sort of vow or oath during our sacred space creation, because, I want to give something to the gods that often gives so much more back to me. So what can I promise? What can I vow to do? And you need to make sure that you do it, though. So that's a big one. Also part of ancient Greece, funeral rites. There were a lot of rituals and practices related to that, and how you tended to a body. I mean, for example, if you didn't tend to a body correctly, it wouldn't necessarily go on after death. It would kind of linger in this sort of liminal space. So it's really, really important that you bury your dead correctly. Also, a lot of rituals around weddings and marriages. While marriage wasn't really seen as like a love story, more of a deal, or like more of a very legal situation, there were still a lot of practices around that. Aphrodite blessing things, giving offerings to different gods. Hera is of marriage, and making sure that your union was blessed in some way. There are also a lot of mystery cults in ancient Greece. The trick with mystery cults is because they're mysteries. We don't know all the details. But we do know enough to know that they existed. That probably the most famous one is the Eleusinian Mysteries, the story of Demeter and Persephone and Hades, and Persephone's descent into the underworld, and the many different ways we could interpret that story. Another practice that was very common was the idea of oracles, getting information, divining, also going to an oracle and asking them pretty important questions. The oracle at Delphi is one of them. That is the one that rings true for and rings most prominent for folks. And that was put into place by Zeus. There's a whole story about that. And people would come from all over the lands to ask the oracle for answers to their questions. And the oracle was always right. Their answer could always be interpreted as something that was correct. Maybe we'll say that. Also, temples. Temples, of course, temples to the gods, temples to various aspects of community. And within those temples are sanctuaries, or sanctuaries outside, temples on the inside. And those places were places to bring offerings, to celebrate, to gather, especially if you were a particular devotee, if you were training to be a priestess or a priest. And also, within the ancient Greece were the Olympics, the Olympic Games, and celebrating and sort of doing them in honor of Zeus and in honor of how great the gods are and were and are, celebrating their strength and their talents and their skills and their cunning, and also having a big old game and a chance to celebrate afterwards. But also beyond all of this is the idea that there were many personal practices for folks, things that were important to them, things that were crucial for their lives at certain moments. It was said that in a lot of families, the eldest son was sort of the priest for the family, and they would be the one who took care of like making sure the gods were happy, making sure the offerings were happening, that certain rituals were happening, etc. But for a lot of folks, ancient Greece, this is great, gods, great, all the background, super great. But what about the magic? And lots of that, lots and lots of that. So again, this is a very abbreviated version of this. However, so Robert Garland is another prominent writer about ancient Greece and says, magic is a difficult concept to identify in ancient Greece because there was no category exactly equivalent to our modern notion. The word magos, from which magic derives, referred to as a Persian shaman. It is likely that the use of what we might broadly describe as magical practices was widespread in all places and at all times, however. So magic existed, not really a word for it. And even today, magic is, you can't practice that on any of the sacred sites. Witchcraft is legal, and it is an interesting tension to walk in that. So I go into, in my book, talking about high and low magic. Now, the binary withstanding, high magic was really like that formal, that devotional to the gods magic, and low magic was, as maybe in fairy tradition might say, the magic that worked, the magic that you did on the everyday. Also a lot of magic around divination. We already talked about oracles, but divining through a myriad of methods to see, how the crop was going to go, how this particular family member was going to fare. thinking about, Psyche and Eros in that story, and Psyche's parents taking her to the oracle because why is she not married yet? And, the big questions. And, divination was a big deal, and people turned to that. Also, a lot of prayers in Greek magic, that prayers to the gods and prayers to and within the stories. Definitely a lot of spell work. You look at the Greek magical papyri, you have an entire cookbook of various spells that you could do even today. I would suggest skipping the one about drowning the cat, but there's plenty of others. Also, and one of my favorite things that I really want to look more into is the idea of curse tablets and amulets. So curses, in case you didn't hear that. Those are exciting. And I think that they have a lot of messaging that might even be worthwhile to explore in the everyday modern context. That's not advice, but that is something to look at. And the other thing, too, is that within the Greek pantheon, the way we learn about that is through myth and through story and through finding out what was said, how it was said, who said it. And the thing that I really like to bring forward that I already have mentioned is the idea that there are a lot of translations of these myths, and even more than you would realize. There are certain ones that get more attention, and that makes sense. But also, I encourage folks to find a variety, because reading the Iliad or the Odyssey from one viewpoint is different from another viewpoint. Emily Wilson's translations of those two are different from the others that have been used previously. And so one of the things I strive to do is to have multiple translations in any of the work that I do and try to bring forward. There's Richard Lattimore, there's Carolyn Alexander, and I also have a very long list of various other options. Because usually we focus on, there's a lot of male academics that have translated ancient Greece tablets and all the different findings, but there are a lot of women-led translations, and I have a big list of that in my book, so you can find those. And I think that the other thing that I want to talk about, especially with the Greek pantheon, is that I think the reasons why people really gravitate toward this is not only because it tends to be taught in a lot of grade schools, not mine, but that the stories are very human. And the stories are very much something that I have been able to relate to, at least. The stories of miscommunication over and over, the stories of jealousy, the stories of love, the stories of I don't want to do what my dad says, the stories of there's this prophecy and I want to outrun it. That happens a lot. And I think that to really get to deepen your knowledge and your experience in the Greek pantheon, to read the stories, like even the ones that are for children are the best, actually. I think that the more you can expose yourself to the way these stories have been told, the more you expose yourself, again, to the fan fiction that is ancient Greece and to the deities as individuals and not just parts in a story. A couple of things that I would also bring forward in terms of working with a pantheon is it can be really tempting to look at all the gods as being similar or all on the same page. And I really encourage folks to look at them as distinct individuals. A lot of these ideas came from what we would say is the Middle East. And so a lot of these stories and these characters and these gods have been filtered through their movement and have changed based on where they sort of found their worship sites. So it's good to look at them individually and to see where they came from. And that's really what studying a pantheon is. Where do folks come from? Where have they been? What are their influences? And how might I relate to that or not relate to that? Like, I think of Aphrodite, well, all the time, but I think of the way in which she came from Ishtar and Astarte and, came over through the different lands and changed as she came over. And as she came over to ancient Greece, there was kind of already some deities or some thoughts around war. And while she is and was a goddess of love and war, they didn't really need that in the pantheon at that point. So that's why she isn't really as associated with that, but she still is. And so those are the kinds of things that I would really invite folks to look for and to see what can be brought forward by maintaining curiosity and maintaining the willingness to challenge what has already been said, and to maybe look for, like, this is why other translations are so great. Like, how can we look for other stories that might refute what we think we know? Because if you're looking at the Greek pantheon as a part of religious practice, personal practice, etc., the more you know, the more you can create relationships that are authentic, that are sustainable, and that are based on like a real love and a real desire to know what is true for you. There is no one truth in a pantheon. There are many truths. There are many ways to look at things. And my hope is that we can continue to practice that curiosity and practice that willingness to question in the bigger world too, because the thing about my practices of relationship building with deities is that, subtly and not so subtly, it's really about building relationships across the board. And if I can practice that with the gods and they can be mostly forgiving, I believe that humans can too. So, so I would say that the other things that you might see in like the book that I have written is things about the various festivals. Also, there's so many beings in Greek mythology that I didn't even try to list them right now. There's also gods that have different stations in places. Like when I talked about the Olympians, you didn't hear about Hades, and you didn't hear Persephone because they're really not Olympians. They are in the underworld. They're the Chthonian gods. And there's also the sea gods and the sky gods. And, so you get to there's quite a menu of gods that you could work with, and beings and personifications of things. Anya, for example, is the personification of grief. Pitho is the personification of persuasion. You have a lot of things that you can delight in and usually get confused by too. And I really hope that it is an exciting practice for you, because I have certainly found that. But the book arrives, I think, December 2nd, technically, or that's what one of the booksellers says. But I'm going to have a book launch on November 30th with Rachel again at my side, making sure that I don't go wildly off track with what I'm talking about, because this stuff is really true to my heart.
Is that my cue? That was my
I think
cue.
It is. That's great, huh? Segue.
Very smooth. Very smooth. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that fascinating subject, as always.
Thank you so much.
And we will see Irisanya back a bit later for the Q&A panel. So thank you.
See you in a bit.
And now, next up, we have the Irish. I would like to welcome to the screen best-selling author, teacher, expert on all things fairy, translator of all things ancient Irish, and a huge amount of other things besides. Welcome to Morgan. Your list of accomplishments and skills it's too big to describe.
Yes, I'm. You can't tell because of the lighting, but I am blushing right now. So,
Well deserved.
thank you for that.
Well deserved. Now we have the Irish, I believe.
Yes. Let me see. I do have a presentation. Let me see if I can.
This is where technologies and the Fae have to behave.
Okay. Can everyone else see that, or only me?
Hang on a sec, and I will. There it is. Should be coming onto the screen. There you go.
Okay,
All
perfect.
good.
So,
I will
yes,
leave
hello
you.
everyone.
I will leave you to it and all the pretty pictures, so that people can actually see it on the screen and have fun. And I'll catch you afterwards. Thank you, Morgan.
Yes, just so everyone knows, this is a fairly basic PowerPoint. It's more just to go along with what I'm saying so that I stay on track because I can get very tangential with this subject. But hello, thank you everyone for being here. I am talking about my book Pantheon the Irish and more generally talking about the Irish Pantheon right now. So we'll dive right into it. The image on the screen is street art in Dublin. I took the picture last time I was there. I just thought it was fun. So everyone else gets to see it too. So, what is the Irish Pantheon? Irisanya already gave a pretty good definition of what a pantheon is. In this particular case, I'm going sort of more the common popular perception of what a pantheon is, which is a group of related gods and goddesses from one particular culture. In this case, obviously the Irish. I kind of start here when I'm talking about the subject because I find that there could be a lot of confusion. When we talk about the Irish pantheon, people have some very set expectations based on their understanding of the more classical pantheon shape. Classical in this case is a term that's used usually for Roman and Greek mythology and culture in a lot of ways. And the idea of the Roman and Greek as the template for how we understand other cultures can cause a lot of confusion. So I just wanted to kind of start by establishing that everything you think you might expect from a pantheon based on what you understand from the more Greek and Roman sources is not going to work particularly well with the Irish pantheon. There is sort of this expectation, again, based on the classical, that a pantheon has this very particular structure to it, that it involves sort of one overarching deity who's in charge, often a king, sometimes a queen, that you then have an assortment of beings who are related to that deity one way or another, and they each have very particular things that they do or are in charge of or are connected to, which is beautiful and logical and organized, and that is not how the Irish pantheon works. The Irish pantheon is messy and often contradictory, and you just sort of have to go into anything related to this group of deities with that understanding. I find that it often frustrates people who aren't familiar with it, so this is why I start with this. The reason that this happens with the Irish pantheon, and it's not that this is not true for other groups, including the Greeks and the Romans, but it is particularly impactful for the Irish, is that we are really talking about an array of regional beliefs that can be very, very different from one place to another. And those regional beliefs, oftentimes, very particular areas, would have almost their own pantheon, as we would understand it in this context. And that would be unique to that particular area. And what happened is, this is not a modern situation, but what happened is about 1,000 or so years ago, when all of this material was being recorded and written down, generally by Christians, they really kind of lumped everything together. They sort of forced all of these different regional beliefs into what was intended to be, not didn't necessarily work out this way, but was intended to be one cohesive whole representing the Irish pantheon. The problem, though, when you do something like that is you're pushing things together that don't necessarily work. So when you come to an understanding of the Irish pantheon, when you're interested in it or studying it or want to connect to it in a spiritual sense, you just sort of have to accept that these contradictions exist. And a lot of times there is really no resolution for them. You have a regional story, for example, in one area that's going to say, oh, the Morrigan was the main deity in this story that was causing the action to happen. And you're going to go to a different version of that same story, and they're going to say, oh, no, it was Bive. Bive was the main character behind it. And this is not because the Morrigan and Bive are the same being. It's a whole other theological conversation right there. But it's because in this first area, the Morrigan was probably the primary, particularly war goddess, whereas in this other area, Bive was probably the primary war goddess that people looked to. So when people in the different areas were telling these stories, they would just sort of substitute in their particular deity connected to whatever. And what happened then when all of these got squished together is that we have contradictory versions. We have one character in one place, one deity in one place, take on a particular role, but then in a different place, they're not going to be there. The Irish pantheon is just not as widely cohesive as maybe some other pantheons could be. So that segues nicely into why we're going to talk about this in more depth for why they are not your classical pantheon. And again, the image on this slide is some street art that I saw in Dublin the last time I was there. So one of the first things that people looking to connect to the Irish gods tend to immediately go for is who is the god of whatever. And usually they'll focus on something that they have a personal interest in or feel a connection to. And the idea, of course, it would be too easy if it changed. Let me see, because my slide has changed. I'm not sure why it hasn't. Well, okay, imagine, because I'm just not going to waste time and we'll go forward this way. Imagine you can see a street art image depicting a bird flying downwards in front of what looks like a stained glass window. It was very beautiful, and I'm sorry everyone else cannot see it, but moving on. So, not your classical pantheon. People look for gods of specific things. There's this sort of assumption that we're going to have a structure wherein every god has a neat little box that they belong to. I am radically oversimplifying here because it's obviously not that straightforward with classical pantheons either. But I find this causes a lot of problems with people looking into the Irish pantheon because they expect these neat little boxes. They expect, if they're looking for like a sun god, to call on at perhaps one of the fire festivals or midsummer, that they can say, like, what is the Irish? Who is the Irish sun god? And you are very quickly going to find out that there is no answer. And part of why there is no answer is that that's just not how the Irish pantheon works. The other part is that a lot of the early academics who were writing about this material, analyzing this material, even up through fairly recently, always tried to shoehorn the Irish into this classical pantheon structure that they were working from. So, what you'll find very quickly with this subject, if you look for who is the Irish god of the sun, pretty much every single named god in the Irish pantheon is going to show up in one book or another described as a god of the sun, because that is just not how this works. And when you try to take the Irish pantheon and push it into this framework that it's not going to fit into, you're immediately going to have these sorts of problems. So what you need to do approaching the Irish pantheon is not look for things in that way. Don't look for who is the god of the sun. Look at the individual gods and goddesses and what they are connected to, what their stories tell us about them. And the main example I tend to use for this is the war goddesses, to kind of illustrate why this concept can be a real problem with the Irish. Most classical pantheons, with my understanding of them, will tend to have one primary, usually a god of war, and then maybe some others that are sort of tangentially associated with it. In the Irish, we actually find there is a multitude of war goddesses. And the fact that they're goddesses instead of gods, right off the top, kind of illustrates a bit of the complication with this subject, because most other examples, like I said, you will find gods. With the Irish, it is goddesses. There is one reference that pops up to a god of war by name, but he is never mentioned in any actual stories. We have no information on him. He's just kind of this obscure figure. And usually he gets mentioned in the context of a war goddess who is described as his wife. And there's not just one wife of the war god. There's actually several that are mentioned, which again just kind of calls back to that difficulty where we have all of these regional beliefs that are getting squished together into what is supposed to be one cohesive thing. So instead of one primary god, or in this case, goddess of war, we have multiple. There are at least 6, I believe, that come up in different contexts. And even these different goddesses of war have some really complicated connections to each other, or separations from each other, which just makes it a very difficult subject to sort of dive into. And again, I use that as an example because it's sort of the easiest thing to point to. We can apply this to anything else as well. And I touched a little on the god of the sun problem, where there really isn't one. And to kind of just quickly jump back up to that, I will give you an illustration of the god of the sun problem. You will see people talking about the god Lu as a god of the sun. Nothing in his actual mythology supports this. What we find is that during the Celtic revival period, the late 1800s into the early 1900s, people looked at one particular story where it describes Lu coming over a hill as if the sun was rising in the west. And people immediately jump on that and say, well, he's clearly a sun god because of this one line. He's described as being sun-faced. And actually, when we really dig into Irish mythology, we find that sun-faced is just a term that was often used for extremely beautiful people. Because the sun, people love it and it's beautiful and happy. And therefore, if you're sun-faced, you have those qualities as well. And what this then results in is people labeling Lu as a god of the sun. Now, to be fair, he is understood that way today by many people. If that's how people choose to interact with him, I never criticize how people approach their own spiritual practice or beliefs. But it does sort of show how messy this subject gets, that we don't have anything as actual stories or mythology that supports this. This one little line was kind of taken without fully understanding it during this Celtic revival period, and then turned into this idea that he is a god of the sun. The problem, again, that happens because of this is we have other gods who are also described as sun-faced or connected to the sun in various ways, and they also get labeled as sun gods. Any Irish god that's connected to fire in any way, like the Dagda, is also kind of labeled as a sun god, and it just doesn't work with the Irish pantheon. What we find instead of these neat little boxes is these overlapping purviews. So there really isn't, in my experience, usually one singular god or goddess that is associated with something. Usually, because of these regional beliefs, you'll find multiple. So again, this is why I use the war goddesses as an example. If you lived in one particular area, your war goddess might be Bive. If you lived in Ulster, your war goddess would be Macha. if you lived in a different area, maybe more central Ireland, your war goddess would be the Morrigan. And this doesn't mean these are all the same being. It just means that these were each associated with war, and those particular regions would look to their local deity. Again, because there really was no overarching pantheon originally during the pagan period. That seems to be something that was more created about 1,000 years ago. So I realized that 1,000 years ago is not exactly recent, but just for context. Another interesting thing we find with the Irish pantheon in particular is there is no moon deity. Most other cultures, we can find at least one being who was associated with the moon. Usually, this is a deity who was said to guide the moon's path in the sky, things like that. We do not have that in the Irish. There are a couple potential suspects, I guess we would say, that could have perhaps originally been moon deities, but we've lost whatever stories connected them to that completely. We kind of have to work on hints and guesses. So, whereas we have a dozen sun gods in the Irish pantheon, we have no one explicitly connected to the moon historically. There are some modern ideas around this because people really want a deity of the moon. And there are certain names that kind of get pushed into this. You'll often see Anya, for example, described as a goddess of the moon, even though there's much more persuasive evidence connecting her probably to the sun. Again, I'm really hesitant to dive into the everyone is a sun deity thing, but her stories lean more in that direction than anything connecting her to the moon. We just don't know who that deity would have originally been. Another thing that is a pretty significant factor when it comes to the Irish pantheon and Irish mythology is the idea of the importance of the number 3. So we find a lot with Irish gods and goddesses is that especially the more powerful or popular or important ones tend to appear in groups of 3. So the Morrigan is often referred to as An Trí Morigna, the 3 Morrigans. This would be the Morrigan, Macha, and Baive, sort of the 3 primary goddesses of war. We see references to the 3 gods of skill, and this would be Goivnu, Luchta, and Cretna. And each of them was associated with a particular type of skill. One was a carpenter, one was a metalsmith, one was a smith for more detailed, like gold work, that kind of thing. Lu, in some stories, was said to have been born a triplet, and either he was the only one who survived, or the others are thrown into the ocean and turned into seals or possibly selkies. So there's this idea that the really important deities are going to appear in groups of 3. It's also, for people who are familiar with it, the idea that Brigid, the goddess, is actually 3 sisters, each named Brigid. That is leaning into this concept, this idea that the number 3 is really important, and the more prominent, influential deities are going to appear in these groupings, which is something, as far as I'm aware, that is fairly unique to Irish and more broadly Celtic language speaking cultures. So, having kind of described a little bit about who this pantheon is, and why this is such a profoundly messy subject, what are our sources for all of this? And I always like to dive into this, and I do this in the book as well, because not that any source is particularly better or worse than others, but it is important to understand there's sort of layers that happen here. So, our primary oldest sources would be the mythology. This is the manuscript material. These are the stories that were recorded from roughly 500 Common Era forward. In writing, the oldest versions tend to be more 11th century, but they're often copies of material that was written down earlier, and scholars can kind of tell this based on the language that's being used in these versions, what form of Irish it is. And something you will hear often, which is true, is we do not technically have any primary sources for Irish mythology. We do not have any Irish myths that were written down by pre-Christian Irish pagans. If there ever were any, they have not survived. As I just kind of touched on, what we do have dates back really more like 1,000 years, and that is copies of things that were even earlier than that. So anything that might have been pre-Christian prior to about the 5th century in Ireland, we just don't have it. It didn't survive. Now, there's two schools of thought, and I'm just quickly going to touch on this. I get more into depth with it in the book, but there's two schools of thought when it comes to Irish mythology. There's what is referred to as nativist view, which says that everything we have in writing, even though it was written down by Christians, it was written after the pagan period, and it does sometimes show influence from particularly classical sources, that nonetheless, that material does have within it genuine Irish belief. These were stories that would have been local stories that were being recorded. And in contrast, we have the anti-nativist. Anti-nativist argues that we have nothing from the Irish pagan period, that everything we have in writing in the manuscripts is not genuinely Irish pagan in any way, that it is creative writing effectively by the Christian scribes who are recording it. Now, full disclosure to my own biases, I do have a nativist approach. I do believe that the original manuscripts contain genuine material. And oftentimes it's kind of clear when the outside material is coming in, how that is happening. But Irish mythology, we do have older material recorded. You just have to understand going into it that it would technically be considered a secondary source. Now, after that, we have retellings. Retellings come to us primarily from the 19th and 20th century. These are versions of the myths that have been rewritten and in some cases fictionalized to some degree by the people recording them. When people recommend, for example, Lady Augusta Gregory's work, Gods and Fighting Men immediately springs to mind, or her writings about Cuchulainn, those are retellings. Those are not translations of older stories. They are not meant to be genuine versions of older things. What she would often do is take multiple versions of one story and, much like with the Pantheon, and squish everything together in order to offer like one cohesive version. The problem with that, of course, is that you lose the regional variations, and sometimes things just don't make as much sense when they're being retold in that way. But that's not to say that retellings don't have their value. They do. You just have to understand when you're reading, like, for example, Gregory's work, that is not the story as it would have been found 1,000 years ago, that this is a sort of more modernized, homogenized version of the story. And retellings can cause confusion. Stuff gets squished together. The authors at the time, also particularly in the Victorian era, would insert their own ideas as if they were part of the original story. So, things to keep in mind with retellings. We also have folklore. Folklore is an excellent source. I actually, probably unsurprisingly, favor folklore over retellings because these are the actual beliefs of people as they existed across the last couple hundred years. Yes, they can be very different from the mythology, but they still represent active living beliefs about these things. And we also have modern adaptations. And again, not that this is a bad thing, but modern adaptations are often individuals' personal interpretations and versions of these stories. So again, I get more into that in the book. If you want to, we could probably talk about that just for 20 minutes. But as we're wrapping up here, I just want to quickly touch on the biggest thing with the Irish Pantheon is that these are stories that are embedded in places. Oftentimes in Irish myths, they reference actual real places in the human world in Ireland that can be gone to, can be seen, can be experienced. These are stories that are very firmly anchored in place. These are often territorial stories, as I mentioned at the beginning. These are gods and goddesses of specific places, not that they are anchored there or tied there or cannot move beyond that space, but it's important to understand these territorial connections and that these would have originally been very regional deities. And very, very quickly, as I am bringing this to a close, there is a huge amount of confusion about the Irish gods versus the Aes versus the good folk, the fairies. Because in Irish mythology, it is said that the good folk went into the Sidhe and joined the Aes, joined the people of the fairy hills. And so the waters get very, very muddy when you try to separate these two things. I actually encourage people not to. Just take them as they are in the stories, and understand them and experience them with the knowledge that this is not a clear-cut subject. There is a lot of muddy water that happens. And that is a good thing, I think. It's one of the things that makes the Irish Pantheon so interesting, that we oftentimes just don't have clear answers to these things. So that is it for me today. I tried to get as much into it as I could given the time frame, but obviously there is so much more that we could cover here. In the book, I do talk about beliefs and practices. I talk about the good folk and other non-Tuatha spirits, history. The book covers a lot more than I can cover in 25 minutes, but I wanted to focus primarily here on the Pantheon itself and sort of what we know about it and why it is such an intriguing subject to get into. Hi, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thank you. I hadn't realised that the Irish Pantheon didn't have a moon goddess. That's quite unusual, isn't it?
It is. And I will say, out of the primary candidates for moon deity, they're gods. And the best arguments for actual sun deities in the Irish Pantheon are goddesses. So yeah, the Irish, everything's different from what you'd expect from a classical perspective.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Brilliant. Thank you so much, as always. What I haven't mentioned yet is there is a downloadable PDF over on the Pagan Collective blog, which has a lot more information in it. And of course, buy the book. Thank you so much, as always, Morgan.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
There's a lot of information. We are throwing a lot of information at you today. There won't be a test or anything, don't worry. But I'd now like to introduce to the screen priestess, author, and founder of Ariadne's Tribe, Laura Perry. Welcome.
Well, hi. It's so great to be here. I love to see all my fellow Moonbooks authors hanging out.
It's like a Moonbooks party.
It is. I've been watching all along, and so yeah.
And we're inviting all the deities along today as well, like you do.
Oh, yes. Yes, always.
So, Laura, it is the Minoans, which is a fascinating subject. Probably the pantheon least known about, I would guess.
I think so.
But you're going to enlighten us.
I'll do my best.
I will leave the floor to you.
Okay, well, so yeah, the Minoans are frequently kind of glossed over or left out entirely from books about the history of the Western world. And so today I have Pantheon, the Minoans, this marvelous little book, which I have recently written and Moonbooks has so delightfully published. It's a 145-page book. I cannot squeeze 145 pages of book into 25 or 30 minutes of talk. So I'm going to narrow my focus first because first, I apologize. It is still ragweed season where I live. So if I cough and sneeze a little bit, I apologize in advance. So yeah, the Minoans are not really well known. And so let's start with who the heck were they? It's so easy for all of ancient history to kind of glob into a singular mass in your head. And so the Minoans actually lived long before the Greeks or the Romans or the Iron Age Irish even. They were a Bronze Age culture. That means from their height, the height of their civilization was like 3000 to 1300 BCE. They were based on the island of Crete, which is the largest island that belongs to the modern nation of Greece. It's not the largest island in the Mediterranean, but it is one of the large ones. Excuse me. The Minoans were a seafaring people. They sailed all over the Mediterranean, traded with other cultures at the time. You're probably familiar with the Egyptians, the Mesopotamian cultures of Sumer and Babylon. So they traded with all of those. The Minoans were a high civilization. They had cities with paved roads, believe it or not, and indoor plumbing. Gasp, I know. But these are some things they're known for. What they're not known so much for is the nuts and bolts of their religion. We can see the temples that were the centerpieces of their big cities, and it is fairly well known that women had high status in Minoan culture. And so that these are useful pieces of information to start with to work toward reconstructing their pantheon. And reconstructing is what we have had to do because unlike with the Greeks or the Irish or the Romans, we don't have any primary sources from the Minoans themselves telling us about their religion. They were a literate culture. They wrote a script called Linear A, but we can't read it. It has not yet been deciphered. Clickbait headlines to the contrary, don't believe them. It has not been deciphered. We do have sources from the Mycenaeans, who were the very earliest Greeks who lived and traded with the Minoans in the Eastern Mediterranean toward the end of the Minoan era. So there's overlap there between the Minoans and the Mycenaeans. So we have Mycenaean sources, Linear B tablets that they wrote. And we have scraps of mentions from Egyptian papyrus. And then we have fragments of myth that survived into classical times, so that the Greek writers wrote down whatever stories and myths had managed to survive the late Bronze Age collapse. And so these are all puzzle pieces. We have the archaeology, we have dance ethnology, comparative mythology, the few bits of myth that survived, and trying to put it all together. It has taken us in Ariadne's tribe. It took us a number of years to put this all together. It's like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where you don't have all the pieces and you don't have the box, so you don't know what the picture looks like. So it was kind of a challenge. We have come up with a structure for the pantheon. We have names of deities, and we have a structure for the pantheon that reflects the likely social structure of Minoan culture. So here's a thing. The gods, of course, are their own independent selves, but the way humans relate to them is based in our human culture, right? There's a filter between us and them because we are not gods. And so in order to understand them, we kind of put them into quasi-human form in our heads, in our brains, in our psyches, in order to understand them. And one of the ways that we do this is to arrange them in organizations that reflect our own cultures. So, for instance, a culture that has a patrilineal or patriarchal slant to it is liable to have male deities, gods, in prominent places. and that only makes sense. It's just a reflection of the way humans understand relationship. And so we see relationship between the deities in a similar way that we see relationship among ourselves. So the Minoans were apparently a gender egalitarian culture. They may or may not have been a dominator matriarchy. We don't know. There is still research to be done about that. But they were most likely matrilineal. And so in approaching the reconstruction of the Pantheon, we looked at it from the point of view of a matrilineal society. What does that look like? What does a human family look like in a matrilineal society? And therefore, what does the family of deities look like in a matrilineal society? So first of all, I would like to tell you that our ultimate experience is that you cannot force the Minoan pantheon into a tidy human-style family tree. We tried it. It didn't work. It's more like a carnival funhouse full of mirrors, which you have to take with a sense of humor. There are family relations between different deities, most certainly. Some things that we can recognize as looking like family relations, but not a tidy family tree. And in fact, some deities end up looking like reflections or twins of each other. So it gets kind of tricky there. Also, the mythos for each of these deities is intricately interwoven with the sacred calendar. So in the handout that I've included for this talk, I have included a very brief, just bullet point overview of the sacred calendar that we've reconstructed based on astronomical alignments of sacred buildings like the temples and the peak sanctuaries and the Tholos tombs. But there's so much more to it. Obviously, there's a whole chapter on it in the book, but just so you're aware to begin with, that the mythos is inextricably tied to the calendar, the wheel of the year. So when I'm talking about some of these deities, their active times during the year, or the times when they are most interactive with humans, are based on the parts of the calendar, the seasons and times of year when they do their thing. So the head of the pantheon, which we in Ariadne's tribe prefer to call the family of deities. The head of our family of deities is a trio of mother goddesses, and they represent the sacred realms of land, sky, and sea. And if you think about it, the Minoans were an island-based seafaring culture in the Mediterranean, and so their entire lives were lived at the intersection of land, sky, and sea. And so this would have been a very a constant, live, active reminder to them of these three realms and the deities who represent them. And I apologize in advance if the names of some of these gods and goddesses break the closed captions. They're all written out in the book, complete with pronunciations. So you've got that as a reference. Also, before I forget, I just finished recording a reading from a chapter about the Pantheon in the book, and I'll be putting that on my YouTube channel in a couple more days. So if you want to hear some of that, just hear a little excerpt. That'll be up, should be up by Monday. All right, so at the top of the Pantheon, we have the Great Mothers, land, sky, and sea. Some of these names you may recognize from the Hellenic Pantheon, the Greek Pantheon, because the Greeks borrowed some of the Minoan deities. The early Greeks were in contact with the Minoans. They were trading partners. And so some of these deities continued on in life, so to speak, in the Greek pantheon. This is a common practice in human cultures. We borrow from each other all the time. We borrow fashion, we borrow religion, we borrow politics, all of it. So Earth, the sacred realm of Earth, the island of Crete, is the mother goddess Rhea. She is, her body is the island of Crete, and she is an Earth Mother goddess in the same way that there are Earth Mother goddesses from all over the world. Every culture has their own, who represents the earth where they live, the land that the people there are connected with. And you can even think about it in terms of a connection with the ancestors, because if this is the land that your ancestors are buried in, this is the land of their bones. So this is the land of your family line. The sun goddess. Morgan talked about there being sun goddesses in the Irish pantheon. The scholar and researcher Patricia Monahan she has passed away now, but she did a lot of research about the ancient Eurasian sun goddesses, and it turns out that the Mediterranean is one of the places where there were sun goddesses in early cultures, and the Minoans were one of those early cultures who had sun goddesses instead of gods, or they had one sun goddess. We call her Terasia. We don't know what name the Minoans called her, but her realm is the sacred realm of sky. The sky, the light, the sun. Volcanoes and hot springs are also hers, because in the ancient world, people imagined the sun. It's above the earth during the day, right? And then at night, it goes down in the west and it goes under the earth, right? And so if it's under the earth, what's it doing under there? Oh, it must be heating up the water in the hot springs, and it must be melting the earth in the volcanoes. So volcanoes and hot springs also belong to the sun goddess. And the third realm is the sea. And this is the goddess Poseidaya. And her name is actually attested in the Linear B tablets that the Mycenaeans wrote. This is one of the oldest deity names that we've got. She is Grandmother Ocean, and you can imagine how important the sea was to the Minoans. They made their livelihood trading. They traded. They brought raw materials in and made them into jewelry and carved stone vases and pottery and bronze figurines and daggers and all kinds of things, and then traded them back out on ships across the sea. So you can only imagine how important it was to their economy, but also to them personally. Fish and seafood were a substantial part of the Minoan diet. And in times of famine, in times of bad weather, and after the Thera eruption, you may have heard people talking about the ancient Minoans being equated with the culture of Atlantis. This was an idea that took root in the early 20th century when archaeologists were first excavating at Knossos. And they, at the time, thought that the Thera eruption happened about 1450 BCE. And coincidentally, a whole bunch of Minoan cities were destroyed at that time. And so everybody thought, oh, well, the Thera eruption destroyed all of Crete, and so that must be where the story of Atlantis came from. In the last few decades, a lot more archaeology has been done on Minoan sites and regarding the Thera eruption. And it turns out we got the date wrong, substantially wrong. The Thera eruption is now dated to about 1600 BCE, 150 years earlier than they thought, which changes the story entirely. So it means that the Minoans actually rebuilt after the eruption and continued on for a couple centuries. They had a hard time of it. There was famine. Knossos was eventually taken over by the Mycenaeans, who saw, an opportunity and took it. And it turns out, sadly, that the destruction of those cities, all the major Minoan cities except Knossos, were systematically looted and burned by human hands in about 1450 BCE. The current theory is that the Mycenaeans were unable to take over, and so they destroyed it instead. But anyway, it wasn't that one wasn't a natural disaster. So in those last couple centuries, I can imagine the Minoans feeling more than a little ambivalent about their grandmother ocean and even about their sun goddess, because it was a volcano that had erupted. And so that must have been a very difficult time for them, not just practically, but also spiritually, because they had lived through what must have looked like the end of the world at the time. And they may or may not have felt like their deities had deserted them. So, when you work to reconstruct a pantheon, you're not just looking at a list of deities. You're looking at a set of relationships between the humans of a specific culture and those deities. And so there's so many layers to it, far more than I could put in the book, but there is a lot in the book, believe me. If there's so much to the way we relate to the deities through the filter of our own lived experience. And so the Minoans' lived experience toward the end of the Bronze Age was definitely difficult. Okay, so let me see how many more bits and pieces I can squeeze in here. So the Great Mothers have children, of course, because that is what the archetypal mother does. I'm sorry, I'll get in trouble if I don't mention the three mothers, Rhea, Tarasia, and Poseidaya, who represent the realms of land, sky, and sea, are not the only mother goddesses in the Minoan pantheon. There are two more. There is the serpent mother. You may have heard of the snake goddess. You may have seen images of the figurine with her holding a snake up in each hand. The serpent mother is a fairly enigmatic figure. She moves between the spaces of material reality, and she is a mystery, capital M mystery. She must be experienced to be even partly understood, and I'll leave that at that. The other mother goddess in the Minoan pantheon is Orania. She is the cosmic goddess, great cosmic mother of all. She is the starry night sky, the fabric of the universe. If you're into quantum physics, she is the quantum foam. So those are all of the mothers. And so the children, all the other deities in the entire pantheon are either the mother's children or reflections of the mothers in one way or another. So we had a triplicity of mothers, of the great mothers. We have triplicities of sons and daughters. There's one son and one daughter for each of the great mothers. So and you're going to recognize some of these names. Some of them kind of changed identity between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. As people passed down myths orally, one generation to another, the stories changed over time. They changed from one place to another. They may also have been changed on purpose for political reasons, because that's what humans do with stories. So bear that in mind when you hear the names of some of these deities. I'm talking about them in the context of the Minoan pantheon and not in the context of later tales from other cultures. So the three daughters, Rhea's daughter is Ariadne. She is the Lady of the Labyrinth. Her name, Lady of the Labyrinth, appears in one of the Linear B tablets dating back to the Bronze Age. She is also the Queen of the Dead. Scholars believe, that there is a Minoan precursor to the Eleusinian mysteries. And we have reconstructed what we think is a plausible version of that set of Minoan mysteries. And in that story, Ariadne is the prime mover and shaker, I guess you could say. She is the one who descends to the underworld willingly, no abduction involved, descends to the underworld during the fallow season to care for the spirits of the dead, because she is the Queen of the Dead and she loves them, and that is her responsibility. And then when the growing season begins, she rises back up to the world above with us. She comes back up with the first green sprouts in the field. And there's a much more complicated story behind that. It's in the book, in the calendar section. I urge you to read it and contemplate it and see how it feels in the cycle of the seasons where you live. Tarasia, the sun goddess, her daughter is Arachne, the fate goddess. She is the benefactor of the fiber arts, as you might expect, weaving and spinning. And it is her thread that winds through the labyrinth and that Ariadne shares with those who need it. Posidaia's daughter is Anthea. She is the Minoan face of Aphrodite, who is an extremely ancient Mediterranean goddess. Anthea is the goddess of beauty and of love, but especially she teaches us to find beauty in places we don't normally expect it. She teaches us to find the underlying true beauty in the world rather than just the superficial beauty. The suns, there are gods, plenty of them in this pantheon. It's not just goddesses. The Earth Mother Rhea's son is Tauros Asterion, the starry bull. He is obviously a bull god. He is connected with the constellation Taurus and probably has been since the Stone Age. Two of his faces are the Minotaur and Zagreus. Tarasia's son is Korydallos. We don't know his Minoan name. So as we are a spirit-led tradition, he led us to the Greek word for the lark, the bird, the lark. And so that's what we call him. He is a joyous god, a bit of a trickster. He loves wordplay, especially puns. And Daedalus and Talos are two of his faces. So he is also associated with metalsmithing, specifically bronze smithing. Bronze was extremely important to the Minoans, both economically and spiritually. And Posidaia's son is, believe it or not, Dionysus. The god of fermentation and sacred ecstasy, the vine god, also has a lot of connection with the sea. You have to dig back through his mythos, through the stories that survived over time. But he is strongly connected with sailors and dolphins, and we view him as a psychopomp for sailors who die at sea. And so I can see that I'm running low on time here. There are a couple dozen more deities. As I'm flipping through my list here, we have horned gods, we have Aletheia, we have the dactyls and the hecaterides, Minos, the moon god. A lot of people are a little surprised to discover that the Minoans had a whole pantheon. Sir Arthur Evans, who did a major portion of the excavations at Knossos in the early 20th century, had his own theories about what the Minoan religion looked like, and he really marketed the idea of the Minoans being monotheists with only one goddess. And so that has kind of colored people's perceptions. But actually, the Minoans were polytheists just like everybody else during the Bronze Age. So that's they were actually really quite typical in that regard. And so I guess I'll end there, because otherwise I would just be talking all day and using up everybody's time.
Brilliant. Absolutely fascinating. I love the story of the sun disappearing under the planet and heating the water.
I mean, does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense.
I mean, not scientifically, obviously, but
But
as
you can see why they thought that.
Yeah.
You can, can't you? It does make perfect sense. I'm assuming there's a connection between the Minoans and the Minotaur.
Yes. Yes, he is actually a Minoan deity. He's a face of the bull god Tauros Asterion. So
So that's the connection. It is, like you say, it's a huge subject, but I think it's one that probably we don't generally know much about, but people should.
I like to think so anyway.
Definitely. So thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. We will see you in about half an hour, and we can talk about it some more. Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. And now we have the Romans, one of my personal favourites. We have the absolutely wonderful author and creatrix of Wolf Woman Rising. We have Rachel Roberts. Welcome. A pair of Rachels. I don't know if that's wonderful or terrifying, really. Are you with us, Rachel? She's looking. She's got that look that everyone gets when they're trying to set up a camera on screen. I'm guessing she can't hear us. Can you see us? Can you hear us, Rachel? Technology has not been our friend today. We have the panel in about half an hour. Hopefully we will get that sorted by then. If anyone has any questions, do please pop them on the comments. We've lost Rachel. She'll come back. She says hopefully, because I don't know that enough about the Romans to talk about them for half an hour. We have the panel afterwards. So if you've got any questions, do please pop them in the comments and I will put them to the panel. I've got a list of questions as well. There is the downloadable PDF, which is on the blog, and I will get that up here for you. It's in the links, but it's there on the Pagan Collective blog. It is the latest post on there. What the speakers did was write some information for you. We put it together in a PDF, and it's there for you to download. If you are looking for any of the books, and there is a book about each of the Pantheons on the Collective Inc.'s Moon Books website, available from all the usual bookstores, all the usual places that you can buy books from. they're all available there. I am hoping Rachel will come back. There we are. Hello, hello, hello. Are you with us, Rachel? It is that terrifying look, isn't it? I'm trying to get this to work. Oh, Rachel, I can hear you. Can you hear me? This is like every Zoom meeting ever in any company. She's looking very studious at it. So we've got the 4 Pantheon books. There are more. The 4 that we've covered today, the Greeks, the Irish, the Minoans, and the Romans. But there are a couple more as well on there. There is the Welsh and the Egyptians as well, all found in the usual places where you get books from. I'm guessing Rachel can't hear me or see me. It's that look of frustration now. Do have a look as well on YouTube channel for the Pagan Portal podcast, which is also produced by Moonbooks Publishing. 2 episodes a month, myself waffling on to various wonderful, interesting people. This is the look of frustration. We've all been there, haven't we? We have all been there. Let's hope she doesn't do anything embarrassing, because that wouldn't be good, would it? There's lots of noise going on in the background. I'll take it off while she sorts it out. Technology at its best. The weird thing is I can hear her. Oh, I think we've gone to a mobile phone. Very interesting question, Rosemary. Rosemary's asked a really interesting question. We'll throw that at the panel afterwards. Is there certain gods or goddesses that would not work together at all for mixing pantheons? Really interesting question. We will ask that one. I will add that to the list. Rosemary, stick with us. No, poor Rachel isn't having much luck at all at the minute. You're going to have to listen to me waffle. What else have we got coming up? Lots and lots of things coming up. We've got some fantastic guests on the Pagan Portal podcast. What do you want from us? If there's anything you'd like to see from Moonbooks, are there any books that you would like to see, pagan subjects you would like to see books on? Are there any talks you would like to hear us talk about, or authors you would like us to interview? You can always contact us and let us know. If we can do it, we will. Let's have a look, see if Rachel's come back. Rescue me, Rachel. I've got some questions that I am going to ask later on. So therefore, if you want to put any questions up there, do pop them up there and we will have a look and see. Let's see if we've got Rachel back again. Hello. Oh, hello. Thank goodness. I was thinking I'd have to talk about Romans. You're kind of with us, Rachel. You haven't got much signal, but you are there. Oh, there we are. There we are. Much as I love the Romans,
am I here?
You're there just about. Welcome.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I was running out of things to say. People weren't going to, talk about me. So, welcome to the screen, author and creatrix of Wolf Moon Rising, Rachel Roberts. Oh, we have been plagued with technology today. It has been one of those days. So, I'm going to abandon you now and leave you to talk about the wonderful, wonderful Romans. and I will join you afterwards and we can have a bit of a chat. So I hand you the screen
Okay.
quite willingly.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully it's working. Thank you for your patience. I tried 3 times. I have no idea what happened, but I'm here. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit about the Roman Pantheon. So I'm going to share very much kind of what the state religion was for the city of Rome and what religion meant for kind of the people that were within that city. So how did they connect to their gods, and how did they worship them? Just very, very briefly. The reason I say the city of Rome is because it does vary all over Italy. You know, the influences of different cultures, and then, you know, Italy in its earliest beginnings is starting out as various tribes. But the city of Rome becomes kind of that central hub where all of this information, all of these religious kind of traditions, and then other cultures all come in. So let's just bring like a little lens, you know, straight onto Rome, and let's just explore what religion was for them. So if we go way back to the beginning, the foundations of Rome, the deities there are something that are called the numen. So the numen is kind of the spirits of place. So the spirits that are within something or somewhere. And they're the deities that, you know, end up evolving into the Roman gods and goddesses, become full-formed gods. So they can be an abstract concept, or they can be connected to a certain place. So an example of that is the goddess Flora, the Roman goddess of flowers and sensuality. So she is an abstract idea in her beginnings. So she's literally the blossoming. So when blossoming happened, that was divine act, a divine occurrence that needed kind of worship or offerings to make it happen. However, it's also believed that she was a numen of a very specific, perhaps, orchard to the Sabine people, which is the ones that she belongs to. So they eventually develop and become Romans, gods and goddesses. And that kind of growth comes as Rome itself grows. So it's starting out as an agricultural society, a farming society, and we have the influences of several different tribes that come in. So the Etruscans, the Latins, and the Sabines. And they're all bringing their individual numen, you know, that they've had that have been connected to specific families, specific kind of workplaces, perhaps jobs and roles. And then as they all bring them in, kind of very specifically almost to their hills where they're living, and these tribes come in, as that city then grows and the people become more and more and more, so those deities almost grow as well and become bigger ideas and concepts that are linked to politics almost. So whereas before they were working on behalf of, say, a farming family, they then come to work on behalf of the state instead. So an example of that is Janus. So he is in his form kind of this numen of the door, the way. So you come in and out. And then eventually he becomes the god that is looking over the doorways of the city of Rome. And then he grows again and becomes this bigger, wider concept that's about beginnings and endings. So he's marking the new year and the end of the old year. And he has celebrations around him that are creating, you know, a sense of time and space for the whole empire instead. So I'm going to focus in specifically on 2 triads. So I'm going to share a little bit more about some specific deities that meant a lot to the people of Rome, because there are so many. I could be sharing with you absolutely thousands of deities, you know, for various just random things. There were some, you know, that were connected to, like I said, the doors, the doorways, the keyhole, the door frame, the door itself. You know, there's other ones that are connected to specific events as well. So like the god Ridiculous. Well, we think he was a god, but we don't actually know. But this deity Ridiculous, the only kind of place where we have him marked in history is as the god that stops Hannibal from getting into the gates of Rome. And there's no other documentation about him. And there are many, many deities like that. Even when we get to the 1st century BCE and we have this time where Augustus is really reviving the religion of Rome, there are so many practices, rituals, prayers, and deities that even by then the Romans have forgotten who they were, what they do. They have often a tradition, that they'll carry on, that we better do this so we don't upset that god. We better say this prayer on this day in this way so we don't upset them, but we don't know who they are anymore. So rather than covering as many as I can and just listing them off, which would be fun, but we're not going to do that, I'm just going to cover 2 triads. And these triads are made up of 3 deities. And these 2 tribes are really showing us who are the principal deities of the city of Rome. And in doing so, they're showing us what's important to those people as well. And they're also reflecting those different cultures and those different tribes that created the Romans. So the first triad that I want to share with you is the archaic triad. And this is made up of the deities Mars, Jupiter, and Quirinus. And these are believed to be kind of the oldest gods with the masculine. And this is considered to be the oldest triad of Rome, of the city of Rome, so established in the early days when we're looking at the kings of Rome. So in that triad, we have, first of all, Jupiter, of course. So Jupiter is reflecting that early link to the farming cultures and agriculture, and he is considered the ultimate god, like the king of the gods. And the reason being is that because in his abstract form, he is the rain. And the rain, of course, is so important because without it, there would be no crops, there would be drought. So his reign is absolutely essential. And there was even a ceremony that would happen every year where the women of Rome, the matrons, would go up to his temple and would ask for the rain to come that year to ensure that there was crops and nobody starved. Jupiter was also a god of lightning. So he has some kind of origins in the Etruscans where they have lightning gods there. And there's 12 different lightning gods. And he is, the lightning in the daytime. And everywhere where lightning hit, that would be a sacred space to Jupiter. He was also a god of kingship. He was also head of the army, so he was particularly relevant to the military and the Roman army, wherever they were. And he was also the one that people made vows to. So he oversaw vows. So when vows were made, he's one that kept them and oversaw that. And also, if you didn't keep that vow, he'd also be the one to bring retribution. As well as that, we have the god Mars. Mars is considered the father of Rome, a caring father. He is a father of the farmland, of the farmyard, of the field. He's a god of agriculture and fertility. He's also connected to childbirth, and he was deemed to be a protector of young people specifically, and also was connected, through giving those giving birth as well, through his connection to his mother. So his mother, Juno, who we'll hear about in a minute, was the queen of the gods, and she birthed Mars on her own through the influence of Flora. And so he's connected to conception in that way as well. And so he was deemed as a loving, benevolent god that would look after the Roman people. And then we have Quirinus, who is a bit of an obscure god. He's one of these ones that we don't really have much documentation about, but we believe that he was a Sabine war god. So he was all about war and the army again, kind of about fighting. The Quirinial Hill was named after him because he was probably the most important god to the Sabine people. But like I said, we don't have much documentation about him apart from the fact that he was a war god, and they think that he became important because as these tribes were growing, reaching out and wanting to protect their towns, their city states, rather than just their farms, he became more important as people were meeting and clashing with each other. So that's the archaic triad. with these three major gods who remain important throughout Roman history. But we have an introduction of the Capitoline triad. We're looking at in the time of the Republic, this becomes more and more important, and the Capitoline Temple is built for them on Capitoline Hill, becomes the most sacred and biggest temple that there is in Rome. So the Capitoline triad is very much influenced by the Etruscans. The Etruscans that were the kind of dominant culture and people in mid-Western Italy throughout most of the time that Rome was starting out. So they were very much a matriarchal kind of society, and women had just as much importance as men. That's reflected by them having goddesses as their protector, kind of patrons of their city-states. And so we have this Capitoline triad is made of Jupiter, who we've already introduced, and also Juno and Minerva. So very briefly, Juno was considered the queen of heaven, lady of the sky. She was a god of light, so particularly starlight, but also light as in when light is coming forth. So she becomes a goddess of childbirth, who's bringing that baby into the light, and also because of her conception of Mars as well. And she was really the principal female deity of the Etruscans as Uni. That was her original name. So she becomes a goddess of marriage, of womanhood. She's covering everything and anything to do with women. When they get married, she's important. When they're having babies, that's also important. She's also covering that idea of queenship and female leadership as well. So the empresses, the women of the aristocracy were particularly connected to her, and the women that were head of the household called the matrons. We then have Minerva. So Minerva is the goddess of craft and also of trade as well. So she was the one that governed the trade guilds. So things like the actors, the carpenters, the writers. So she's a good one for book people. And also those were connecting, with making stuff. So like the sculptors, and she would be found in the libraries and also in kind of the marketplaces and the building sites of ancient Rome. Again, she has her origins in the Etruscans as Menvra, and she is one of the lightning deities. And she's actually lightning where it is illumination. So she's the illumination aspect of lightning, where it lights up. And we think this is how she became a goddess of wisdom. So these are really, they're the principal deities for Rome, kind of like they're holding that energetic kind of blueprint of Rome, along with Dea Roma, who is, goddess Rome herself. And all of them combined now, I believe, are really powerful deities for helping us with the same themes as a growing Rome. But when we are trying to establish something perhaps or build something, they're really good with supporting with foundations and then protection and guiding, whether that be a house yourself. I can't imagine many of you are establishing a city, but if you are, they'd be fantastic for that. But, things like your creative pursuits, if you want to establish, a family and a business, or you have something that it is a concept that you want to kind of bring that energy of expansion and growth to it. They're going to help you to create the sustainable and solid foundations that you will need for that. So that's a little bit of a brief introduction. How am I doing for time? I'm okay. Great. Okay, so I have got a little bit of spare time actually, so I'm going to share a little bit more about kind of I want to share with you more a bit about the foundational goddesses of Rome as well, and the foundation gods that we have in the foundation story, because I think that's really important for understanding the Roman people and their connection to religion. So we have one very powerful story that has the foundation of Rome. A lot of the ancient Roman religious stuff, isn't documented. We do have archaeology, but they didn't have this great writing culture until we get to this kind of first century and going into the Augustan era. We suddenly get all of the poets that are looking over at Greece and going like, well, they've got like loads of poetry and loads of drama, and we want some of that, we want something. So they kind of start adopting mythology and connecting it to their own native, Roman or Italian deities to kind of give them a bit of a backstory. That's when they start giving them relationships and stuff. And it's around this time that we get the foundation story of Rome actually written down, and put into word. And in that story, we have some very pivotal figures, one being Mars and one being Lupa. And so in this story, checking I've got time. Yeah. In this story, we have kind of this connection to what we call the Latin state, which is just slightly below Rome. We have this place called Alba Longa. And in that story, we have a king, and I'm not going to go into him, but him and his brother are kind of like rivals for the throne. The king is usurped by his brother. He has a daughter, Rhea Silvia, and she's like the heir. And we think she's one of the clues as to the origins of the Vestal Virgins. She is put into captivity, so she can't be impregnated and have an heir. But Mars comes along and says, I'm going to get my city. I'm the father of this city that's going to come. And so he gets her pregnant, and she gives birth to Romulus and Remus. They are then put into a basket by this evil uncle and put into the river, and they go along to Lupa. Lupa, the she-wolf who finds these babies, looks after them, protects them, feeds them. And then after their time with her, they then become kings themselves and eventually establish the city of Rome. And within this story, it mentions all of these important places, that are become important for the ancient religion, of Rome. So Lupa's Cave, Palatine Hill, that becomes the most sacred hill of ancient Rome. And on that, you get the emperors that continue kind of this story of kingship by building their palace there. You get the Cave of Lupa, which has an annual kind of festival around it. And then you get some of the most archaic kind of ancient gods and goddesses have their temples and their shrines around this area, all beginning as groves, as these numens, so the particular deities of the groves or the springs that kind of pop up. And these 7 hills become these important like sacred spaces for ancient Roman religion. It's really based around these 7 hills and their presiding deities, and each one is kind of like a district for a different tribe, and they have their deities almost on that hill. So you have like the Aventine Hill becomes the hill of the plebs, the commoners, the agricultural people, and their deities are on that hill. You get the Palatine that becomes the royal hill that's having the deities that are connected to the emperors. Like Apollo is brought in from Greece, becomes important for them. And then you have the Capitoline Hill, which becomes kind of like the treasury connected to Juno and her governance there. And Quirinal Hill, still has all those Sabine gods and goddesses on that hill. So really their deities, their pantheon is connected so intrinsically to the landscape of that city, from the rivers, the river Tiber, even the sewers, have all got their own deities. So you find that when you're going around Rome, and it's something I quite enjoy, is that, everything that you're looking at in Rome is reflecting the fact they do have thousands of deities. Like, you're like, well, gosh, every stone is a deity, every doorway is a deity. Every sewer cap, every kind of tree, that they've all got some presiding deity. And it can be quite overwhelming. So I would start out with the Capitoline Triad, and in my handout, you can have along with this presentation, then you we'll be able to find out more about, these principal deities that I've shared with you this evening. So I will leave it there, because I know that there's going to be time for questions after, so you can ask me questions about any of that. And I hope that you've actually heard some of this. I haven't just been talking to myself.
No, you're all right. We heard you.
Oh,
No, brilliant. Thank you. We will wait for Laura and Irisanya when they are ready. They can join us and we'll have our panel of questions. I think it's all fascinating, similarities and differences. And I'm intrigued by the way the Romans actually practiced their religion. I love the lairs, is it? The household altars.
yeah.
I love that idea.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they're quite flexible with it as well. So they kind of have their set prayers, but that's really the only thing that's written down. They're kind of a bit free with it. Like, you can worship them in whatever way you want, really, They're quite open about that. But yeah, they have these household gods. I mean, I call them the Laras, but that's just the way I like to say it. So I'm
I
sure
could be saying it wrong.
no, I'm sure they don't mind what they're called. I think that, like, we have our own accents, don't we? Like, have so many people ask
Yes.
me, like, how do you pronounce, like, especially the Latin? And I go, well, I can tell you how I say it, but it's probably not how the ancient Romans said it, because I don't know. We can't hear them, so we don't know. So just, they know what you mean. Long, you know what you're saying.
Yeah. As long as we don't upset them, that's fine.
Yeah, that's true. As long as you're nice when you say it. Wonderful, Laras.
Yes. So let's add these back to the screen. Hello, welcome back. So
Thank you.
we have a
Been
panel of
listening along.
experts and me. Well, I've got some questions here. We have had some, so brace yourselves, get your brains in gear. I actually have a question for each of you to start off with. What drew you to your respective pantheons? How and why was it that pantheon that you were drawn to? So I'm going to just pick someone to go for. Irisanya's nodding, so I'm going to. Well volunteered.
Yes. How did I pick this pantheon? I think this pantheon picked me, and I know that that's an easy answer, but I think it's true because up until I started working with Aphrodite, I was just kind of not really. I was not committed to a pantheon. I was looking around at all of them. I was really into Norse mythology for a while, and then Aphrodite came, and I think that's where it all started. So really, she's to blame, but also to thank.
That's a good way of putting it. Laura, what about you?
I had a transformative moment in a high school art history class. We had a textbook that had colored plates in it, and the teacher had us open the book to look at the plates. And I turned the page, and there was the picture of the bull leaping fresco from Knossos, and I just went goosebumps head to toe. And I feel like that sort of, I mean, you talk about us choosing them or them choosing us. I feel like that sort of made a live connection somehow.
Yeah.
And so, like, we were both aware of each other at that point. It's like, I'm looking at the universe and the universe is looking back at me. And so that was the catalyst.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That began it all.
Yes. Yes.
Rachel, what about you?
So I think I was just fascinated with the Romans, although I didn't love them to start with. It was a love-hate relationship. I think it still is, from early childhood, because my local city, Chester, is considered kind of the most Roman city of
Right.
Britain. And there's loads of Roman stuff, and there is the only in situ shrine of Minerva in Northern Europe. And I remember finding that, quite young and being fascinated, like who is this goddess? Because at the time I thought there was only God, because I was brought up, in a kind of a Christian background, and I didn't understand that there could be divine females. And she just grabbed me, and then has been with me ever since. And I did, as part of archaeological digs in the Roman amphitheatre. And I remember one of my most significant moments of my life is finding a Roman poo. And I had this like deep down connection, thinking, gosh, like the last time this was touched, it literally came out of a gladiator. And I thought, who is this guy? Like, what was he thinking while he was on the loo? And, what did he believe in? And that was it. It's all down to Pooh and Minerva.
Pooh.
Oh, I have a goal now. That's great. Thank you.
Definitely. Let's set a new bar now. That's a new standard. I love it. That's brilliant. Now, we have had a question, which is an interesting one from Rosemary. Are there certain gods or goddesses that would not work together at all from mixing pantheons? I do like this question. Would anybody like to take that one first?
I'm happy to. I'm happy to.
Go for
No
it.
problem. Yes and no. I think it's hard, right? I think it's hard to answer that question and just have one answer, because I think that just as I have a lot of different friend groups that I think would get along, I don't really know until they actually get together. So we could speculate that maybe all the war gods and goddesses don't necessarily want to hang out with each other, but also they might really like that. So for me, I think that a lot of my magic is, well, let's find out. And I think that that's a fair answer. And I think it's also wise, if you are asking that question, that it sounds like maybe you're not comfortable with certain deities working together, and that could impact it. So if you're asking that question, maybe not.
Anyone got anything to add to that one?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you go. You go.
Yeah, the Minoans actually did mix pantheons.
Right.
They were they traveled a lot all around the Eastern Mediterranean, and they literally brought deities home from their travels. And so there are Egyptian deities that have been very clearly added into the Minoan pantheon. Probably also a few from Mesopotamia. So there is historic precedent for that kind of thing. Places where people, where that happened while the whole world was still polytheistic. But yeah, even I have a fair amount of personal experience with it, and I have to agree with Irisanya's analysis that it depends, because there are times when I can set up. For instance, Tarasia, the Minoan sun goddess, is a very powerful figure with with very strong opinions about many things, and sometimes she's perfectly happy to be part of an altar with a number of different deities. I've got a Minoan altar just off screen here that that has her and the other mothers and 5 or 6 other Minoan deities, and she's groovy with that. But there have been times when she has said, "No, I need my own altar, nobody else here." And so it also maybe kind of depends on what you're doing, like if whether it's just general worship or whether you have a specific goal in mind, or and so for me at least, it's always a matter of listening to the God phone, or whatever you want to call it, that listening to what they have to say, because they have their own agenda as well,
Yeah.
as to what works and what doesn't for them.
Rachel, did you want to add something?
Just that in my experience that, I have some from like almost every pantheon, I would say, because I see it, I shared this before in a live that, I see them as like round this round table, and
Yes.
they kind of support me with different things. And I have, an Egyptian one, I have, Welsh, I have Roman. I find they actually help me with different aspects of my life. So like for me with my Welsh deities, that's about my lineage. It's about my blood and my land that I live on and my ancestors. Whereas kind of the Roman deities, I feel like I'm in service to them. So it's a different relationship.
Right.
Therefore, I'd connect them for different reasons. But the thing I was thinking, like, when you asked that, I think it also, just to throw another spanner into the works, it also depends if some people believe that the deities are all the same deity, and some believe different pantheons are actually like different energy forms, like, so like Minerva and Athena, are they the same deity or are they two different deities? I mean, I can imagine if, I know what I believe, but, would they be rivals, or are they working for the same archetype or the same, kind of ends, So I think it depends on how you view the deities as well. I think that also adds another element. That's maybe perhaps a bigger thing to dive into.
We
It
might
could
need
get
a
complicated.
few more days for that one. I think in my own practice, it does depend who the deity is. The Kalach is not very. She doesn't like working with anybody, so it does depend who it is, doesn't it? But it did. That's brought up another question actually about altars. Do you all have, Laurie? You said you've got a Minoan altar. Does that have lots of the Minoan deities on it? Is that your sort of main,
Yeah, I
where
do.
it goes?
Yeah, I would probably, it would destroy my desk to pick the laptop up and turn it around to show you. Yeah, I have a main Minoan altar. It's in my studio here, and it always includes the three great mothers, Rhea, Tarasia, and Posidaya. They're like the anchor. Um, the way we've reconstructed Minoan ritual, which is in keeping with Bronze Age religious practices, um, the presence of the three mothers creates the energetic temple. And
Right.
so they are like the anchor. And so if I've got them over there, all the time on my altar, then they are sort of the anchor for that spiritual space. And whichever other deities are on there varies. Sometimes I change them out based on the seasons, because
Right.
like different stuff is happening with different deities in different parts of the year. Um, Sometimes I change them out depending on my personal needs, whether I have, please help me with this, or thank you for this, or um, sometimes I find a nifty thing out walking in the woods, and my mind says, "Oh, this is this deity's item," and I come in and I put it on the altar, and now that deity is there too. So yeah, and it's actually it's the top of a lateral filing cabinet, so it's kind of large. And I have smaller ones too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's the typical pagan house, right? Your neighbors who aren't pagan just think you have a lot of really nifty knickknacks. Uh, yeah, so yeah,
You can never have just one altar.
right.
Irisanya, do you have a collective, for want of a better word?
Do I have a pantheon of altars? I So Aphrodite. So I'm in the midst of moving, so it's all kind of, a lot of it's disassembled, but at the height of the altarness, Aphrodite had altars in almost every room. Like, she was just very needed to be in my office, my bedroom, behind me today. And but I do have other altars for other gods. And so what I have ever had at this point, Hecate was at the top of my stairs, because it has like
Oh,
crossroads.
cool.
And so that was there. She had her own little shelf. And then Artemis was on a shelf underneath her, because I felt like she wanted like a little bit more space. But they're all still on the same shelf. They're just not next to each other. And then on another bookshelf in my office is Aphrodite, has like the top. And the second one had Demeter and Persephone. next to the Norns and Iris, this all makes sense to me. The Norns, for me, sort of like span everything. They're everything. And so I don't feel like they don't get along with folks. And yeah, I've just kind of put people together. And then I sometimes I've had wall hangings of different gods. And so those will usually be near where the altars are, sometimes not. And I think the only place that hasn't had an ongoing altar, it's had temporary altars, is my kitchen, which is interesting. But yeah, my outside has them. They're all over the place. I don't mind gods being together. I think that I have never experienced anyone being persnickety about that, but I do think that Aphrodite just wants all the space I will give her. So sometimes you might meet a deity like that.
Rachel, do you have an altar for your council?
So yeah, some of them are represented, around my house, probably like the other two are saying. So I have kind of what I deem as like my really personal ones that I talk to all the time, that I want to see before I sleep and when I wake up, and they're literally right next to my bed. So that's Lupa and Minerva, and then I have Rhiannon and Ariandrod are in here. And then I also have it's kind of, I call it like a working altar. It's, where I'm working, and Apollo and Flora are there. And they kind of like help me with any kind of jobs I'm doing, I suppose, my business. And then I also have one in the garden, because I'm a gardener and I grow a lot of fruit and veg, and my garden is like my living altar. So it's a way I seasonally connect, to the divine. So I have a specific rose bush and a specific tree where I give offerings. And then also if I'm like emptying the flowers that are normally on my altar, they then go to those sacred places, and that's where I give thanks. And often I like, my altars are kind of like my bean plants and my tomatoes and my flower beds. That for me, they're like my living altars. So I do have some, the statues around for like the principal ones, but I feel the divine most in my garden. And so that's where I just sitting on the grass, with the bees around me, that is an altar space. And that's where I experience it most.
Yep, I have a garden one too. Yeah, they once you get one, they kind of breed, don't they? It's just one of those things, you have to roll with it. My next question: what do you think people gain from working with a pantheon as a whole, rather than just picking odd deities? Is there a benefit to working with the pantheon, just that one pantheon?
I personally think,
Irisanya,
yeah,
you go
I'm
for it.
ready. I'm
Yeah,
ready.
go for
I'm
it.
so ready. So because it's very personal to me, this question, because I kind of like piecemealed a lot of my practice for a while. And then I realized that when I work with an entire pantheon, I'm still building up to it. I get the full story. And I get the story from what has gone on in the various myths and stories, who was involved, why they were involved. Like when I have everybody in the room, uh, it's more fully fleshed out how the relationships work, how they don't work. And for me, that makes more sense. I think that I still have in my brain certain gods that I work with more, but I think working with an entire pantheon is really helpful for that very, relational aspect. And you can't just listen to one person's story and know the story, I think.
Right. Yep. Laura, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people are drawn into a particular pantheon by an individual deity or a group of two or three. But to me, it's kind of like, and it's kind of like when you get married, you marry that person, but you're also attached to their whole family,
Yeah.
right? And so it is helpful for all involved to develop healthy relationships with the rest of the family, right? Because
That makes sense.
we are all connected. And so, yeah, if no matter what your doorway is into a pantheon, even if so, I get this question pretty regularly because people are shocked to discover that there's an entire pantheon of Minoan deities, right, and not just one goddess. And so the thing is, you don't have to have dedicated everyday activity relationships with every single deity in a pantheon in order to have a relationship with the pantheon, right? It's just like you don't call up your second cousin every day to see how they're doing, but they're still a part of your relationship web. They're still a part of the threads that are woven into your life. And so you just check in with them every now and then. And so to me it's very similar. It's all about relationship.
Yeah.
It's not a the deities are not cosmic vending machines. You don't put in an offering and out pops the goodie. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's about being in relationship with them all the time,
Yeah.
one way or another.
Brilliant. Rachel, what about you?
So I can't speak for other pantheons because I don't know them as well as the Romans, but I, as well as connecting to the individual deities, I do connect to the Roman pantheon, and that just means like I said, I was talking before about the energetic kind of blueprint of like what Rome stands for, the energy and spirit of Rome itself. So it's kind of what all those deities are kind of working towards. So, if Rome is kind of like the CEO, they're all kind of working for this business. It's any way of describing it. But, like when you work with, Pantheon, the Romans, like I said, it's about foundations. It's about sustainable, strong foundations and building expansion. They're about growth, and they all kind of hold that. They all kind of run along this same theme. They can work as a whole. So sometimes I will like just invoke the Roman gods rather than just someone specific, and I know that
Right.
Roman gods is going to have that big building energy. So if I'm feeling like I really want a big boost of confidence, or I'm like, right, I've got a new project, I want Dea Roma to kind of like, who encompasses all, I suppose, to kind of to be what I'm connecting to. So I do connect to the pantheon as a unit, as
Yeah.
well as the individual ones as well. And I do find that it's not a bigger energy, but it's almost like they're all working together for one purpose, kind of one. I don't know how to put it, but they're all contributing to the cake, and then
Teamwork.
the cake, yeah,
Teamwork.
it's kind of what the end of it. That cake they've all produced together by putting their thing in.
Mhm.
It's just because I'm looking at you, that's why I'm thinking of
I
cake.
know. I'm all for cake. Anywhere
Yeah.
we can make an excuse for cake is good with me.
Sounds good. Let's do that. Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Mhm.
Now, I come across quite a lot. Um, are there similarities between the pantheons? So we do find with a lot of the pantheons, there's a thunder god. You guys have mentioned sun deities, moon deities. Do you think Do you think each pantheon runs with similar structure to it? If that question makes sense. Irisanya, do you want to kick off with
I
that one?
feel I feel like right now the folks that we have, like we're like the timeline. I feel like it's like Laura to Irisanya to Rachel. Like I feel like, because the Greeks, were influenced a lot and also have influenced. And I think that what I think about pantheons is that it's a really great way for humans to organize ideas and to organize things that are important, like certain themes, certain relationships, certain concerns. Having a deity for war is important to understand, how to navigate that, and So I think that there are a lot of similarities, but I think what I think I see amongst different pantheons is that they adjust based on where they're located. Like there is a context that comes from land, that comes from location. That's why Greek has like sort of can a little wibbly wobbly because it kind of went through a lot of different things and landed. Yeah, those are my thoughts in the moment.
Laura, what are your thoughts?
I mean, it makes sense that there are, I guess, maybe two different layers or levels to this question. One is the stuff that is common to all humanity, right? So things like parents and children, relationships, birth, death, things like that. And then there are the things that differ from one culture or area to another. And so maybe if we're looking for commonalities, we need to look excuse me, we need to look at the threads that connect all cultures. And then if you're looking for differences, then you need to look at the things that distinguish cultures or geographic regions or time periods. So, so yeah, I'm sure there are things that are universal because we're all human.
Yeah.
But clearly, there are also things that are very different from one pantheon, one era, one region to another. So it might be an interesting study to just like see what those two levels look like in different times and
Yeah.
places.
Yeah. Rachel, what are your thoughts?
I think it's like that relationship status, where you go, it's just complicated.
Yes, yes.
Real.
I think it. I think I agree with everything that's been said already. Like, with the ancient Roman gods, they were abstract. So they weren't, they were kind of like the lightning, so they were something that happened. So when a door opened, they were that opening of the door. And then you have like specific springs or specific orchards, that are then got these deities. And it's not really until kind of, like I said, they start getting influenced by the Greeks that they start to think about putting them in family groups and, kind of giving them this anthropomorphic kind of style that they didn't have before. That was kind of like a very new thing to the Roman people. And even then, it's hard to equate, like they're not quite the same. So there are differences, in the pantheons, the Romans and the Greek, that, you can't, they kind of are similar, but they don't quite fit. It's like you're trying to force things to happen, like for them to equate. I mean, the Romans tried to do it because it was a political move. So by saying, oh, your deity's kind of like mine, it helps with people in the empire to then think, oh, okay, well, this is the same god or goddess. So we're all worshipping the same one. And the Romans were very kind of like, oh, we don't mind you worshipping whoever you want to, as long as you also honor the emperor as the ultimate kind of like authority. So they were kind of okay about there being deities, but it's different, like where they are in the empire as well, because the western side, they have almost this kind of like Sulis Minerva, they almost kind of like combine them.
Yeah.
Whereas in like, say, like Greece, the Greek kind of gods and goddesses continue to be worshipped as the primary deities, and the Romans kind of like lesser deities, lesser so. And I think that like the way they've been connected and linked all the time is something that we've done as historians to try and make them easier to understand.
Okay.
And I in some ways, I mean, not completely, but it's like if, say, I went on holiday, like, to a different country and there was a deity there, and I'd be like, oh, that kind of sounds like mine, and then you'd be thinking of your name in your head, even though that culture and that land has given that name to it. Does that mean they're the same deity? I don't think so,
Mm.
Yeah.
but
I was,
that's
yeah.
like
Along the same line, I was thinking something along those lines, Rachel, the idea that there was a certain class and a certain education status that is the ones that are translating these pieces that we find of everything. So it makes sense that there's a lot of similarities because there's a certain group of people that was doing this, and they all kind of talk to each other because they're all part of a certain colleague and all of that.
Yeah.
And so that makes sense that there are similarities.
Mm-hmm. It just makes it simple in the history books, doesn't it? For like Key Stage 2, you know, that, oh, this is just a big guy
Absolutely.
with a beard with a lightning bolt, you know, and it's just, that's just a god.
Yes.
Copy, change the name. Yep.
You know, they simplify something that is very complicated.
These are people that are just trying to finish their dissertation. Can we just find
Yeah.
some consistency across things? So my
Exactly.
advisor is okay with it. Yes. Mhm.
Yeah, we have a saying in Ariadne's tribe: individuation is problematic. You just apply that across the board.
Anything, yeah. Works for most things.
That's a good T-shirt. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, note that one down. So to finish up, any wise words for people about that want to look at a pantheon? How do they pick a pantheon? Do they wait for one to come to them? Actually, another question first, thinking about it. If you are in wherever you live, I'm in England, obviously, is it acceptable for me to work with the Egyptian pantheon or the Greek pantheon, or how do you tie that all in together? Irisanya, you got to go first again.
Great. Super. Here's how I figure out whether or not to work with a god slash pantheon. If I am feeling really called, if I am feeling really inspired, I think that that is a call that I should answer. And I think that there is a difference between following a personal call and getting just enough information to say, well, I know all this stuff and now I'm going to teach it, and and to take from a culture versus to really find yourself personally in relationship. So that's my very simplistic definition, or I guess discernment, is that I personally say work with whatever pantheon. Just don't go out there and say you're the expert when you have like read one book. I don't think that that's the thing. I think that also if you have an authentic relationship, you're going to be more inclined to talk to folks who are, part of the original or as close as one can be. And sort of the thing that I'm doing, there's not, but yeah, I just think that follow that call, cool, see where it goes.
Anyone want to add anything to that one?
Yeah, I'll quote John Beckett, who regularly says, "The gods call who they call."
Yeah.
Um, and so, what you do with that is your responsibility and your ethics. But yeah, I mean, in your personals, I have an extremely broad personal spiritual practice that involves way more than just the Minoans. I don't talk about most of it. I don't teach about pretty much any of it. Um, some of it is just personal, and some of it is not my. It is not my place to be speaking on behalf of those deities or those cultures in public. So yeah, I mean it's a matter of discernment, but um, if your heart is speaking to you, then listen.
Rachel, anything to add to that?
I think it just comes down to having respect, for other
Yeah.
cultures, other people's differences, and you can love something, and that's okay to love it. Like, you don't need permission to love something else, but I do think sometimes we can try and take ownership of things. Like, I suppose as a Welsh person, I could easily say that the Welsh deities are mine and nobody else can connect to them. I have to remember that the deities are here, whatever you call it, the God, divine creator is here for every single person on this planet. They're here for everybody, and they want to help everybody. They want to support us, as humanity. So it's not about, differences, about, this is what's happening in our whole planet at the moment. We're in our little box. I'm in my little country, and there's me and there's you. And I think that our hearts could do with being a bit more open. We could have more allowance, obviously approach different cultures, different pantheons, different people with respect, but also know that there isn't that big dividing wall between us. We are all one people. And I think like the Romans came all the way to Wales here. So I have that connection to the people in Italy, because we once shared like this European kind of like connection. I can find their coin in my backyard. So I think these walls that we put up, these places that we stick ourselves in boxes and say we can't do anything outside this box, I think we need to have more allowance and openness, but that allowance and openness with respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my experience, when the gods shout, they will keep shouting. And if you ignore them, they'll smack you round the head. Generally, you have to listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
Mine usually tell me off more than anything else. But yeah, you have to respond to them. So, any final last wise words about working with pantheons? Irisanya, do you have some wise
I
words?
can
More
always
wise
start.
words.
Sure, great. I think for me, and I've already started to say this, so I'm going to say it again, though, because it's really important to me, is this idea that working with pantheons is learning to be in relationship. It's learning to be in relationship with beings, with yourself, with stories, with conflict, with war, with love. I think that it is a gift also to the deities to work with them in context. It is very easy to piecemeal things together, and I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but I think that there's a lot of depth by recognizing that, Aphrodite comes from a group and is part of that and influences their actions, and she, is influenced too. So I think that while it might seem overwhelming, I think, I can't remember who said it, but like, you don't have to work with every single one all the time. I think that you can just like their Facebook status once in a while. You don't have to go out all the time. But I think that it's a gift to yourself and to the gods to look at them as not just being what you need in that moment, but what they have represented for a really long time.
Yeah, indeed. Laura, anything to add?
Yeah, we're talking here today about pantheons that originated in ancient cultures. And so, one of the things that I've had to grapple with a lot is that these deities may have been the focus of these ancient cultures, but the deities still exist today. And so, just bear in mind that it's the same river, but you're not dipping exactly the same molecules of water out of it. So, no matter how carefully we try to reconstruct what people in these ancient cultures did, um, we are not them.
Yeah.
We do not live in that worldview, and so yeah. Rachel was talking about owning, the deities. We don't own these deities. No one owns the gods. But yeah, just bear in mind that that it all moves and changes
Yes.
over time, and that the important thing is to maintain the relationship through the motion.
Yeah. And the relationship is kind of a key thing here, isn't
Yeah.
it? Rachel, anything to add?
Just, be curious, have fun, and find joy with it. Like, we can get so serious about it,
Yeah.
about like oh, the world's going to end if I don't do this, or I have to do it exactly right. And I think just, this connection is about finding, spiritual fulfillment, spiritual joy. You're here to live your best life and to bring, you know, your best self out into the world. And they're definitely going to support that. So just don't let it be something that's going to stress you out, thinking like, I don't know who to choose and I don't know how to choose them. I don't know when they're going to choose me. Just go with the flow. Just enjoy what you're doing and just enjoy having relationships with them. You know, just I find that I connect with Apollo when I'm dancing and we just have a boogie together, you know, and some people may be like, he's going to send the plague on you. But that's where I have connection to him. You know, it's not about big things. It's about the simple joy of just being with him. So yeah, just have fun, get curious, and take the pressure off.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Absolutely brilliant talks. A reminder that there is a downloadable PDF that everyone has put together available on the Pagan Collective blog. So please do have a look at that. Do hop on over to the Moon Books website and have a look at all these wonderful Pantheon books. Lots and lots of information there. And thank you to everyone for being here, for listening, for watching. And take care, everyone. Enjoy your Pantheons. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a
Bye.
great day or night.